When I say the word control, what comes to mind for you? The struggle that I'm engaged in any moment to control my circumstances or the outcomes seems to be a root cause of so much anxiety in my own experience. Hey there, it's great to see you. I'd like to peel the onion a few layers deep on this idea of control if you have a few minutes. As a father at this point in life, I recognize that I get to experience this battle for control in a more objective light. And I'd like to talk to you about an average everyday morning with my son and how that led me to this revelation of what we can do when we have this anxiety of feeling out of control of our circumstances. So my wife and I heard so many competing perspectives on the toddler era in raising a child. Sometimes the terrible twos were actually the second year, right? Sometimes they were actually the terrible threes. My mom said I was terrible pretty much through 5. My son's second year of life ended up being a pretty peaceful year for us, all things considered. And I remember visiting the pediatrician on his 3rd birthday. And one piece of advice that she gave us stood out to me in sharp relief. She had suggested that if they're throwing a fit, it's one of 2 things. They're sleepy or they're hungry. And I've reminded myself about that piece of advice often throughout the course of my son's 3rd year on the planet. He can be a fairly emotional kid, and unfortunately for me, I think he's inherited some of my traits about perfectionism and this need for control. And some of those tendencies get kind of turned up to 20 in those seasons where he's either craving sleep or craving a snack of some sort, right? Well, the other morning, we were kind of establishing ourselves to begin the day, right? We have these rituals that we all have responsibility over. And for myself, I usually wake my son up when his alarm goes off and I help get him ready for the day. And we come downstairs and set up our initial breakfast and drinks, and I'll grab coffee. And usually we're, playing with trucks or something, right? And we don't yet have this really regimented schedule of, sitting my son down and asking him to eat at a certain time of the day. It's just more of a appetizer-y type of setup, right? Where it's on a plate, on a table, it's available for him. And when he feels like it or when he remembers, he kind of wanders over and grabs a piece here or there of something, right? Well, in the mornings, often he's really distracted. He's trying to, process the day that we had before, the night that just happened. He's excited to participate in a lot of the ceremonies that I go through in the mornings, helping make mama's cup of coffee and what I call opening up the shop, when we're kind of letting the light in the room, and greeting my dog who spends the night downstairs, and just recollecting all the toys that got repackaged at the end of the day. If you're a parent yourself, you might relate to this experience where we kind of go through this process of the house gets blown up and my son parks his vehicles basically in every open plane in our living room throughout the course of the day. And then as he goes to bed, either myself or my wife will kind of repackage all the toys and get them in their containers and put them in their various locations. So each day is this process of undoing the work that we had done and redoing it at the end of the night. All that is to say, there's a lot on my son's mind in the mornings, and oftentimes he won't start actually eating breakfast without some real encouragement from us. And on this one particular morning, he ended up going most of the morning, maybe even into the early afternoon, without having much to eat at all. And it was immediately apparent that the dreaded hanger scenario had established itself in our living quarters. My son transforms in the blink of an eye into one of the Halloween monsters that he admires so much on his cartoon shows, and my wife and I tend to want to run for cover in these moments. Nearly as quickly as that first tear drops from his eye, though, I remember that advice from my pediatrician. I motion over to our pantry and I say to my son, "Hey, I think you might be a little hungry, buddy. How about a snack bar? I can go get you one." And he looks up at me with tears in his eyes and that scowl, and he says, "I don't want a snack bar." And I say, "Are you sure? I think you might be a little hungry." And he says, "I'm not hungry." Inevitably, I'll raise my hands in defeat. I'll raise the white flag and I'll say, "It's okay. All right. No sudden movements." And it is mere seconds later that my son wanders over to the pantry, sits down, looks into the corner, and just starts whining and just bawling his eyes out. So I approach him ever so cautiously with the biggest smile and easiest air that I can produce in this moment of stress that we're both, forced under. And I gently prod him. What's wrong, bud? He won't look me in the eyes. He stays kind of looking towards this corner, of the pantry door, and he mutters in response, but I just do want a snack bar. Now, this is just one example, but my son does this in every conceivable circumstance when he's in this emotional state, whether it's from exhaustion or from hunger. And it drives my wife and I crazy. We'll constantly remind him, don't say no when you mean yes. Yes is yes, no is no. And I know he's not doing this just to be contrarian. He's in a lot of emotional turmoil in these moments, and I figured it out. My son wants to control his circumstances. And this is such a vital need for him that he will go as far as rejecting ideas that didn't begin from him. So in rejecting our recommendations, what he's done is he has taken the idea away from us, he gives it some space, and then he turns the tables and he reintroduces the idea as his command, not our suggestion. And I was thinking about that moment in the kitchen pantry with my son while I was walking my dog this morning. And I recognized so many commonalities in my own experience growing up with my son's experience in this moment. This need to reconcile one's fit in the world. There's so much you're learning as you grow. We're mimetic, right? We copy those around us, and we have a keen need to fit in and to establish ourselves amongst the pack, as it were. Inevitably, that means sort of developing this ego, this kind of individual, this self-centric view of one's environment and one's progression in that environment. As I said, I think some of this is very natural, totally natural. And the stories that we tell ourselves as we grow up are in reference to ourselves, as they should be, right? At the same time, though, I've recognized that as a father, and in my 40s at this point, having lived a good batch of life from here, I can sense the stories that I'm telling myself beginning to broaden away from myself. And I think an interesting byproduct we have early on when we have these stories we're telling ourselves that really put us at the center of the universe is they actually put us on a pedestal, right? We put ourselves on this pedestal. We separate ourselves from the group of people in order to understand how much agency we have and how much lack of agency is there. And the deeper and more detailed and more focused we are on these stories about ourselves, the more and more that we separate ourselves from the rest of the world and the opportunities for oneness and community that exist all around us. Do you happen to struggle with control or perfectionism in your own life? I'd love for you to tell me your story and talk about your biggest hurdles in the comments below. I believe there is this natural arc that many of us, and maybe most of us, take in life where we start very egocentric and we end with the dissolution of our ego. The interesting thing to me is that arc isn't the same for everyone, and not everyone gets as far through it, as far progressed from it as other people. And that suggests to me that we all have, in any given moment, an opportunity to progress towards the dissolution of our ego. So when I was on this walk with Bubba and I was thinking about what could I say to someone who's having this anxiety about their lack of agency in their life, or this concern of perfecting the circumstances that one is, surrounded by, I immediately thought of a quote from Viktor Frankl. He's the author of that really famous book, A Man's Search for Meaning. I really don't want to mess it up, so I'm just going to read it to you up front here, because I think contained within this quote is the seed of the cure for the anxiety of control. And it goes like this: everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And so, as I suggest in many of my videos, control is really a story that we've told ourselves in any given circumstance. So I would ask that you pay attention to the story that you're telling yourself in this moment where you're feeling anxious about your lack of control. And next, most importantly, once you've paid attention to that story, ask yourself, how is this story that I'm telling myself serving me? Somewhere in that second line of inquiry is the root issue that you need to examine. And you might not get super clear or lucid answers when you're exploring these questions for the first time, but the key is to keep trying. I promise you, eventually things are going to rise to the surface that are going to absolutely surprise you. Even at this point in life, in my 40s, I continue to be surprised about what opportunities present themselves in moments of stillness. I go deeper into these stories that we tell ourselves and how to effectively excavate them in another circumstance that I faced recently, a rough bout of insomnia. If you have a few more minutes, I'd love to tell you about that story next. Remember, in any moment, you have the opportunity to tell yourself a different story. Thanks for watching.